You're listening to the Whole Church podcast. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors over on Patreon. Please consider joining them for $3 a month at patreon.com/the Whole Church podcast.
Ephesians 4:11 through 13 states, He gave some as apostles, some as prophets, some as evangelists, some as pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith. Reverend Keno, how can church offices build the body to attain unity?
So here's my take. These offices are supposed to be equipping us to building up the whole body. But now what we've done, I think these offices have taken and become in silos of themselves and tried to build up themselves, and they forgot what their mandates are. So I believe that if we can just get off of our own high horse and know what the mandate calls us to do, and that is to make disciples in all the nations, all the earth, in the name, baptizing them, I think that's how we can have unity.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Whole Church podcast. I am one of your co-hosts. I'm Tiberius Juan, and this is Joshua Noel.
Hello.
I'm just kidding. I am Joshua Noel, that's Tiberius Juan. And today we are at part 4 of our church offices series. We're going to be talking about the office of the bishop, the episcopus. And while we're at it, we decided this would be an opportune time to talk about hierarchy, whether or not it should exist in the church. Listeners may be aware Martin Luther was kind of famous for the priesthood of all believers, anti-hierarchy kind of stance. The home church movement lately bringing up the same kind of ideas. So we're going to discuss that a little bit today as well.
Right. We wanted to give a special shout out to our patrons, Austin, Russell, Sandra, Lily, Jeannie, Aaron, Justin, Frida, Taryn, and Dawn.
Yeah. And before we move on, we do just want to let everybody know, just because someone's represented in this episode doesn't mean that they would get along perfectly with everybody else in this episode. Some of our guests would not be able to have perfect church unity and worship together. That is what we're working towards. We're just not quite there yet. With that disclaimer out of the way, you guys know you have had to watch Barnyard before starting this series. Because our silly questions are all from the movie Barnyard. Today's silly question, TJ, is pretty much the same as last week, but a different church office. If any animal from Barnyard were to fill the office of the bishop at the Church of the Barn, who would it be?
So this is, I think the questions are going to get easier after this. Up to this point, these offices kind of have the same characteristics, like the same general affinities that would make someone, want to be one of these things. But I'm going to have to go. I think I've used all the good ones for Bishop. So I'm going to go with Wild Mike. I think the additional responsibility would really help Wild Mike settle down. Maybe they'd let him out of his little box more than just to dance at barn parties. I really think he'd come into his role, really flourish.
I mean, it certainly sounds like it would be more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to steal your answer from last week for this week. Ben, Otis's dad.
Mm-hmm.
He's alive for enough of the movie that I'm just going to say that it counts. I'm going to let him be the bishop.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Otis could also be a good bishop. I haven't said Otis yet, but into the series,
but I feel like
you
went a different route with this. You went like the guy who partied up in college, had a great salvation story, and is now a responsible bishop.
Yeah, in our canon of the Barnyard, Wild Mike really turns things around. Dedicates his
we're
life
just
to the
continuing
Lutheran
that
Church.
Emmy award-winning show. It turns out,
right. So in the clips coming up, we ask our guests what they think about bishops in the barnyard. We don't, but I kind of wish we did. What we do ask them is how they would define a bishop. Later on, we will ask them the difference between a bishop and a pastor and whether there's a hierarchical system in their denomination or not. And finally, we ask our guests how they can relate to bishops of other traditions. You'll hear clips from Sister Rose, who is a nun at a Catholic Church, who runs the Catholic campus ministry at UNCW. Professor Chris Moreland, who is a religion professor, at that same school. Father Jonathan Resmini, priest at the Holy Trinity Orthodox Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. Rev Steve Lanclos, an Anglican priest working as a chaplain with the U.S. Navy. Joe Day, a leader of a home church and host of the Buddy Walk with Jesus podcast. Pastor Will Rose of the Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Pastor Gary Adkins of Harvest Ministries, Church of God of Prophecy, a Pentecostal tradition in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Rev Keno Cannady of Union Bethel AME Zion Church in Cornelius, North Carolina. Reverend Kelly O'Sullivan, also a minister of the Anglican Church, and Dr. Russell Moore, director of Christianity Today's Public Theology Project and a minister in residence at Emmanuel, Nashville, which is an interdenominational church, but he was raised Baptist. There was a little more variety in how our guests defined the role of a bishop than there was for pastor. So here are those clips about what they had to say about a bishop.
First, we asked Dr. Russell Moore how he would define the role of the bishop.
So, Dr. Russell Moore, how would you define a bishop?
Well, again, I think that's going to depend largely upon someone's ecclesial context. And so there are going to be some people who are going to see in the office of bishop a unique calling that is responsible for multiple congregations. You can see that not only in the Catholic and Anglican traditions, but also in some evangelical Protestant sorts of denominations, especially within the African American Church. That would be very different from, say, a Catholic or Anglican bishop, but has that sort of responsibility for multiple congregations. All the way over to those who are in the more Baptistic sorts of denominations that would see bishop as being essentially equivalent to pastor. And so that's going to largely depend upon how one sees one's larger ecclesiology.
Now we ask Pastor Gary Adkins of Harvest Ministries, Church of God of Prophecy, the same thing. Pastor Gary Adkins, how would you define a bishop?
Well, again, bishop it can be interchangeable with pastor, with elder. In our organization, we make the role of bishop different. Okay, it's a little bit elevated. And I really don't know how to explain this other than the way I just said it. You can be a pastor and not be a bishop in our group. And then while you're a pastor, you can get moved up to the level of bishop, but you're still the same pastor.
So it's not functionally any different?
Not functionally. Now, there may be like places in our polity where we're at our general meetings and we're voting on something, they may have an only bishop voting session. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there might be things like that, but other than that, there's no difference in a pastor who pastors a church and a bishop who pastors a church. None whatsoever.
Would you say it's more of an honorary title?
That's exactly what I see it as in our group.
We also asked Pastor Will Rose of Holy Trinity Lutheran Church how he would define what a bishop is. Pastor Will Rose, how would you define a bishop?
And
In the Lutheran Church, we do have bishops, and my bishop is the Bishop of North Carolina, Bishop Tim Smith, who is a UNC grad and actually played JV basketball with Michael Jordan at UNC. Wow. So he's a great dude. And bishop, again, the Greek episkopos is the word there that's used in Scripture, and it just means overseer. So someone who oversees a district or a territory or a synod to help guide it. So just as I am a pastor that oversees my flock here at Holy Trinity, the bishop's role is to oversee all the churches within their district or within their territory or synod to take care of other pastors and other congregations, make sure that they are healthy, that they are fed, that they are fulfilling their mission as those who proclaim and share the good news of Jesus.
We asked Joe Day of the Home Church and host of Buddy Walk with Jesus the same thing.
All right. Joe Day, how would you define a bishop?
As an elder, I say that tongue in cheek, but essentially at this point you're getting to elders, and I think that when it comes to church governance or ministries or any organized effort, we'll say, to spread the gospel or to do gospel works or anything like that, anytime that it's a one-man band, that's when you start to open the door to it becoming a trend. You know, we can point to countless examples throughout human history of times where this has gone backwards. And the common thread that you find in many of these is that it was a one person at the top calling the shots, unfettered authority, all of those kinds of things. So if you call it a bishop, okay, it's not the end of the world. At this point, I think we split hairs, and I think at this point there's so many different subgroupings of church offices that to me, you're no different from an elder or a part of the plurality of elders that are tasked with their responsibility within it.
We asked Kelly O'Sullivan, a minister of the Anglican Church, how he would define a bishop.
Some people would suggest that bishop and a singular bishop and then elder are synonymous. You know, overseer and elder is kind of used synonymously elsewhere. Some people, like the scholar Luke Timothy Johnson, would see them as the same thing. But historically what happened is that one presbyter was exalted above others as a chairman of a council of elders. And that person made a final call, kind of made the shot, called the shot. At the end of the first century, by 100 AD, you see most major churches had separated bishops and elders. Bishops at that point were senior pastors with a council, a board of elders, and then deacons helping to serve. And they worked with the laity to have the church service. As time went on, then the church expanded. They had satellite campuses out in the rural areas, that districts that they would call that's where we get the word parish. It's from the word district, or a word that meant district. The bishop would delegate to those satellite campuses, essentially, elders. And then so that's where you get the development of what's called a diocese, a region, with a senior pastor over a region of churches. And that's essentially what a bishop is. He's a senior pastor over a region of churches that he's delegated to his elders or presbyters.
We asked Father Jonathan Resmini of Holy Trinity Orthodox Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, how he would define a bishop.
We know that they were appointed by the apostles to be overseers, episkopos in Greek, which is where we get the word bishop. Episkopos just means overseer. And so he is the person, in the Orthodox Church, it's men only who are bishops, who is, by God's grace, blessed to stand in the place of Christ, to be the overseer of the Christian community in a particular region. Usually, historically, it was the bishop was a bishop of a city, and we've carried that over in kind of our traditional Orthodox countries. Here in the United States, we have fewer bishops, so they end up being bishops of very large portions of the Orthodox Church in America, and so. But they are the symbol of unity of the Orthodox in the region that has been entrusted to their care. So my bishop is Metropolitan Alexios, who is the Metropolitan Bishop of Atlanta in Georgia, and he is basically the bishop of the entire Southeast region. And I am directly under his authority. He assigned me to the parish where I serve. He could move me at any time if he wanted to. Thank God he doesn't, because I'm enjoying my time here, and I just bought a house, so that would be unfortunate. But I serve with his blessing. I serve on behalf of him. He has so much the symbol of unity that there's a thing on the altar table called the Antimitzion, and it's a beautiful icon of Christ's being taken down from the cross. And we need to have that in order to conduct a service. And on that is the signature of the bishop. And when the bishop isn't there, I venerate the signature, so to speak, as an imaging of the veneration of the bishop's hand that you do after you get a blessing, because everything has to be done with a blessing. And again, it's not the bishop's personal blessing, but he's offering the blessing of Christ based on his office, his authority given by God through the church to be the overseer of this region. And so everything I do at the blessing of the bishop.
We asked Reverend Steve Lanclos of the Anglican Church the same thing.
So they are given this particular shepherding responsibility, a leadership responsibility. They are especially charged with chasing away heresy, the wolves in sheep's clothing kind of thing, and to guard the church from false teaching. We see the early bishops of the church doing this through the different ecumenical councils that met in the first several centuries. Bishops are also given charge to ordain. That is something in the Anglican Church that neither deacons nor priests can do. So I, as a priest, cannot ordain someone else. Only bishops can ordain. And that is through the laying on of hands. Bishops themselves are ordained by other bishops. And traditionally, it's 3 bishops who will lay their hands on a man to receive the calling and the office of bishop in the church.
Gotcha.
In the Anglican Church, bishops are also given the special charge to confirm. That is something that is different from both Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. So, and Protestantism in general. In the Orthodox Church, priests confirm or chrismate, and they do that actually when at baptism, and they practice infant baptism. So a baby would be baptized and confirmed all at once. And there's historical reasons for why this practice develops. But again, I'll try not to get into the weeds. And in the Roman Catholic Church, where they also baptize infants, children are usually confirmed around 10, 11, 12 years old after they've made a profession of faith. They're confirmed. And it used to be that they were confirmed by the bishops, but that has been passed down to the priests. And now priests in the Roman Catholic Church are allowed to confirm. Anglicanism reserves that special office or that special job for bishops. So only bishops can confirm. And we usually will do confirmations around 10, 11, 12 for children who are baptized as infants. And for any other adults who are coming into the church who have not been confirmed, we will confirm them as well. But again, only bishops do that. That is not something that I nor any deacon does.
Oh, yeah. And For those who don't know, confirmation is just sort of when a person makes their faith their own, basically, formally.
Mm-hmm.
We also asked Rev Keno Cannady of the AME Zion Church what a bishop is in their denomination.
Rev Keno Cannady, how would you define a bishop? Oh.
Okay, so a bishop is an overseer of a church or many churches. And in the Methodist Church, the bishop is not an ordained office. We only have 2 ordinations. I know you haven't gotten to it yet, but we have 2 ordinations. That is just deacons and elders. And for us, the bishop is consecrated, but not ordained. So that means that for us, the bishop has the episcopal authority over the whole denomination, and has the right to his or her office. They can appoint or reappoint pastors. But they don't have a church. Our bishops don't have churches. They have episcopal areas that they oversee. So in my episcopal area, which is mostly of Western North Carolina, from Greensboro to the mountains, and then there's some churches in Jamaica, my bishop is responsible for overseeing, 259 churches? So imagine 259 churches.
That's a lot.
That's very so it's hard to try to manage, but he's like an administrator. So our bishops really serve as administrators, but also as the not episcopal, but the leaders of our denomination. So if there's any questions or issues in terms of the church law, in the interim of our annual meeting, which is the general conference, though the bishops are responsible for doing that. So our bishops function a little different than some other denominations, but they still are consecrated, not ordained for us. That's the main distinction.
Okay. So could someone who is ordained as a pastor or elder, are they allowed to be bishops, or is that?
Yes. And so funny enough, we have qualifications in order for you to run to be a bishop, because our bishops run and they are elected. They are elected during our denomination. And for us, we only have 12. So if one of the bishops is not retiring, or one of the bishops die in office, then that when we meet at our general conference that meets every 4 years, then we're not gonna if nobody's retired or died, we're not gonna elect any bishops. But what we do have is yes, anybody can, but you have to be an ordained elder in our church. You have to have one living wife. You have to have served the church or traveled the church, as they say, for 20 years. But anyone can run for a bishop, but you have to be elected in our church. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's but that's also for all Methodist churches. All their bishops are elected at their general conferences. So if it's United Methodist or AME or AME Zion or CME, that's the same thing for all Methodist churches.
All right. Yeah. So what stood out to me most, just in how our guest defined what a bishop is, was that there seemed to be like 3 main stances of this. See if you would agree with this. It seemed like some people think a bishop is the same thing as a pastor. Some people believe it is an overseer over many churches. And some people it's the highest form of ordination. Like it's a different level of ordination. So it's either like an overseer, a pastor with a cooler name, or an actual different level of ordination. Is that kind of what tracked with you when listening to that too?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. The splits lined up really well with like the liturgy level of the church. Like the high liturgical churches all had similar enough answers, except for, let's say Anglicans were different. Lutherans.
I think Anglican, Orthodox, and Catholic were the same. And then Lutherans were. Yeah.
And then, your lower liturgical churches were like, oh, yeah, pretty much the same as pastor. So,
yeah. And then home church, it's literally the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we asked about the difference between being a bishop and a pastor, or even a CEO, we got some interesting responses. Here are a few more clips from interviews.
First, we asked Professor Chris Moreland, a religion professor at UNCW and a member of the Catholic Church, what the difference of a bishop and a pastor is in his church.
Gotcha. How is a bishop different from a pastor?
Well, I think a good bishop is a pastor, meaning that he shows solicitude and care for his flock. A good bishop with pastoral sense knows when to, whack the sheep over their head with his crook, and also when to cradle them in his arms. There is, as Augustine said, there are different spiritual remedies for different spiritual maladies. So he really is the chief shepherd, and a good bishop is pastoral and is a pastor because they, of course, celebrate Mass themselves.
Now, obviously, this is before they had big screens projecting people in. And so the elders would do the Lord's Supper. The elders would preach sermons and do discipline in the bishop's authority. But that's essentially where you find the distinction: is that a bishop oversees elders, ordains people elders, and kind of runs several different churches at the same time.
But so they have authority, like in a sense that our particular bishop not only is a pastor to the pastors, that if I have something I'm going through, I need to talk with him or pray with, he was definitely there for me as a pastor. But if also there's conflict in my congregation and I'm misbehaving in any kind of way, whether it's relational or abuse of money or sexual misconduct, he has the authority to come in and solve that conflict and either defrock me, kick me out, and help. So he has authority in that way. It's kind of like a human relations or personnel within like a corporation. Yeah. He has the authority to come in and help a congregation that's going through hard times. And they also help connect churches that are looking for pastors. So say Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Raleigh is looking for a new pastor, then he would connect them with a pastor that he thinks she would be a good fit for them.
We asked Sister Rose of the Catholic Campus Ministries at UNCW how she would define the difference of a bishop and the Pope of the Catholic Church. So what is the difference between a bishop and the Pope? Is the Pope just like the bishop of the bishops?
Okay, so the Pope we see as the vicar of Christ, right? The successor of Peter. The Pope is actually the Bishop of Rome. You know, the city of Rome?
Yeah, see, I've heard that.
Yeah, he's the Bishop of Rome. And so the Pope is elected by the College of Cardinals. So he's elected from among the cardinals. And the cardinals, well, this is interesting because this hasn't always been the case, but in the modern age, priests have been ordained bishops, and some bishops have been created as cardinals, and it's among those cardinals who elect the Pope.
How does a bishop become a cardinal?
The Pope makes him a cardinal.
Okay, so that's how one pope sort of has a say in the next pope through that.
Well, and now it's a good point. Yes, as a matter of fact, because according to canon law, of the cardinals, if you are over 80 years old, you can't vote in a conclave. So if you are the pope today, you can create as many cardinals as you would like. And then all of those cardinals who are under the age of 80 are eligible to vote at the conclave. And a conclave is that meeting that takes place in the Sistine Chapel when a new pope is elected. That's when they use the white and black smoke.
Awesome. Okay. That makes a lot more sense now.
So really what stood out most to me is no one was like, oh no, it's nothing like being a CEO. They were all just like, oh yeah, it's kind of the same. Just can't call it.
Yeah, that accidentally came up when I interviewed Pastor Will, and then I just was like, I'll have Sister Rose tell us why it's not the same. And then I was like, oh, maybe a bishop is the same thing as a CEO.
Right.
So I thought that's kind of pretty amusing, actually.
And again, like you see the split between the high and the low liturgical churches, where the difference is either nothing or very austere, like bishop and pastor are extremely different to the Catholic, Orthodox, and Anglican churches, and not different at all in the home church. A lot of disparity there.
Yeah. And this is one where I could see this being one of those where like a lot of confusion could take place. Like if someone from Keno's church at the AME Zion Church was talking to someone from our church about, and someone from our church was like, yeah, Bishop so-and-so, they're picturing someone who is like the state overseer. And what we mean is a pastor who's really cool.
Yeah. A pastor who the rest of the state was just like, yeah, he's a cool guy. Great pastor.
Yeah.
He's bishop now.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Definitely could lead to a lot of confusion if people aren't aware of what the different churches mean when they use that term. Yeah. So was there anything you think we learned from this section that other people listening might have misconceptions about or would have had?
Misconceptions, I'm not really sure about. Just because, these kind of offices I've always known, like these are different in other churches. If I was Catholic, my bishop probably wouldn't teach me how to play the bass.
Yeah. I feel like this might sound weird, but I feel like people from like our denominations or like lower liturgical denominations are aware that Catholics and stuff, their bishops are different. I wonder if it works both ways, or if they think that when we say bishop, they assume we're talking about like an overseer or something.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. We should ask one of the many Catholics we know.
That's true. Right. Hey, if you know and you're Catholic listening, please email us at thewholechurch@gmail.com.
Yeah. Tell us your misconceptions about what you thought about low liturgical bishops, please.
Yeah.
All right. And next, we asked our guests if there was a hierarchical system in their church or not. And here's what they had to say.
First, we asked Pastor Gary Adkins of Harvest Ministries Church of God of Prophecy, a Pentecostal denomination, if there's a hierarchy in their church. Is there a hierarchical system in your church?
Well, there definitely is levels of leadership. As I explained a little while ago, Paul was definitely over Titus, no doubt. Yeah. Titus had some authority because he was appointing elders at local churches on the island of Crete. So he had authority over somebody. So right there we see three levels of authority: the pastors, Titus, Paul. We also see in Acts 15 when the church comes together, it looks like James kind of gives the final word to that meeting on, how we're going to accept the Gentiles. I don't know that for fact, but it seems to be that he was kind of given the final word. Paul even said one time when he went to Jerusalem on another occasion, he said those, and I forget the way he words it, but basically those that were in kind of these high positions.
Yeah.
And so I think there are places where God puts people. They're in authority over other individuals in the organization. Why? The Bible says, give respect to those who watch over your soul. I don't believe that's just for the church member. I believe I have someone, my boss, as I call him, watches over my soul. If I was to have troubles, he's going to call me up. He's going to say, are you okay? What's going on, man? And if I had spiritual issues, he'd come try to restore me because he watches for my soul. So I see it like that. It's not like a worldly system. It's just the way God ordained it, because God wants to speak to a man, and then he wants that man to speak to another man, okay? The reverse of that, Josh, would be what some people call congregational rule. That's where the congregation kind of votes for everything, decides everything for the congregation. We have more of a top-down, where we believe God can speak to a man, who can speak to another man, who can speak to another person. We believe God still deals with people that way, and that there's authority that can be passed that way. That's kind of our heart on that issue.
So how would you answer the criticism that all Christians should answer directly to Christ, and there's, that whole spiel people give of why hierarchies shouldn't exist in the church?
Right. And I think that as far as our tradition, Lutheran tradition, we'd agree with that we answer to Christ. The reason that we're structured the way we are in terms of pastors and bishops and deacons would be for the good order of the church, that we are entrusted with a sacred and holy message, that we have church buildings, we have money, we have gifts and resources so that we can grow the kingdom of God. And so we're organized in a way that can help bring good order to that. And that just as you would have a board of directors that would oversee a corporation to make sure they're not doing anything stupid with their money or their marketing and their advertising, the church is similar that way. And we use biblical names like bishop and pastors and deacons because that's what Paul used. But Paul was just borrowing that language from Greek and Roman society. It wasn't like there were bishops within the Hebrew tradition he was coming from. He was borrowing those languages in the letters he wrote to help bring order and efficiency to the early church. And that's the same way that we would do now. We've gotten bigger. So as corporations get bigger, we get a little bloated. We have to look and see how we're using our resource, but mainly is so that we can be efficient and do the best of our ability with the resources we have, that we're structured this way.
Yeah. Would it be just as appropriate then if a church decided to replace all those names with like CEO, manager, and things that are more contextualized to today? Would it be just as appropriate?
Yeah, I would. I guess you could. There were some who would to go that direction. It would be awkward because you're like, how do you distinguish between just like the CEO of like Coca-Cola and the CEO of a Lutheran church? And in fact, before there was a merger in the 80s of a few Lutheran churches to create the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, there was a church denomination. I think it was, I could be wrong, but the American Lutheran Church had presidents instead of bishops. They were elected to oversee. And then when there's this merger, they decided to use the word bishop because it's more biblical. And then it was a little bit more friendly when we have our continuity, when we have relationships with, let's say, the Episcopal Church. Episcopate, again, they're overseen by bishops. And then the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, just have a more biblical understand. There were some who didn't like that.
Established common language.
And there were some during that merger where there was some who didn't like that because they thought it was too Catholic or too Anglican. It was too hierarchical. They would be seen as these people that we have to walk by and kiss their rings and respect and bow down to. But the Lutheran Church is not as much that as now I still respect my bishop because he's like my pastor and I want to be a good pastor and in good standing with him.
Yeah.
But neither of us would say that he's closer to Jesus than I am, and vice versa.
Gotcha. Okay. But for those of us who maybe haven't been around bishops that often, what exactly is the difference between a bishop and sort of like a company CEO that just oversees the company?
Well, you know what? That's kind of an interesting question, because in the Catholic Church, the entire planet is divided up into dioceses, and there's a bishop for every diocese, and he holds a lot of responsibility. If you were to look at the diocese as a to use secular terms, a corporation, he is the CEO. He holds a lot of power in governing. He's the one who ordains the priests. He's the one who assigns priests and deacons. He's the one who decides what churches stay open and close. Point of fact, much of the property that belongs to a diocese is actually in the bishop's name, although that's in the process of changing. But he is, shares as a co-worker with the Pope in the teaching mission. But it also he has a lot of he holds a lot of power in terms of governing as well.
Okay. So the biggest difference is that the church isn't a business then.
It is not a business. But obviously, though, his first task is to preach the gospel.
Yeah.
And he's the shepherd of the diocese.
Yeah.
That is his primary function.
This next clip is Jonathan Resmini, a priest of the Orthodox Church.
And all bishops are equal. We don't have an institutional structure with a magisterium and then levels of authority. All of our bishops are equal, meaning that all of them can conduct the same services. They have the privilege of ordaining people within their region. They have, authority over all the churches entrusted to their care. They can decide if someone is going to serve there, if, someone has if someone wants to make ask for a dispensation for some unique service or something like that, the bishop has to be consulted for the blessing. And so basically he is the one in whom we find unity and order within the Orthodox Church in each region has their own bishop. And some of them are smaller, some of them are larger.
Yeah. Yeah. So the church I grew up in had state overseers. Is that sort of the same function, most likely?
It depends on, so I think functionally it might. I think certainly the authority to ordain, it's also that, in whom apostolic succession has been preserved.
We also asked Dr. Russell Moore the same thing.
All right. So how is a bishop different from a pastor in your congregation or your church?
Well, my church is a little bit unique in the sense that we have people, even in leadership, who are from multiple different sorts of ecclesial traditions. And we're able to coexist with one another really well. Ray Ortland, the founding pastor, was a PCA Presbyterian and is now an Anglican. Sam Alberry is Church of England. TJ Timms is I don't honestly. I know he grew up in a Baptist context, but I don't know how he would characterize himself right now. Barnabas Piper comes out of a Baptist, Northern Baptist tradition. So I think you have a variety of different people who are able to say we might, if we're sitting down and we're writing a paper about ecclesiology, we might have differences. But we're all committed to this church and to one another. And it, in some places that would probably lead to a bunch of bickering and arguing, but it doesn't there. And so I think that's part of its help.
So listening to those clips again, do you think it's necessary for churches to have hierarchies?
I think any organization has to have hierarchy, but I think there's a difference of organizational hierarchy and spiritual hierarchy, if that makes sense. Like, it's one thing to say, yeah, the bishop oversees the funds for the state and, kind of does human resource managing. And then it's another thing to say he's closer to God than I am or you are or something. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's necessary. Not the spiritual hierarchy so much, but having an organizational hierarchy is usually necessary to have something run smoothly. Too many chefs, not enough helpers, as the old yet politically correct version of that saying goes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, you noticed when God governed Israel, he didn't, lay out, here's the law of the land. It's anarchy. Have at it.
Right.
Yeah. Structure matters to God. How do you think it'd be helpful for lay people, like ordinary church folk, to know and understand what bishops do in their own denominations?
Well, you should always know who to go to for what issues. So knowing what your bishop does is really helpful for that. To me, it seems harder to get a hold of your bishop if you're in a high liturgical church, but I'm sure it is possible. Again, I don't know that. I'm not privy to that information. I am not Catholic or Orthodox or Anglican. So who knows? Our bishops are kind of just guys where if you go to them, you're going to get some good help.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's helpful in our denomination to know these guys are seen as spiritually experienced and adept. Right. And then I would imagine higher liturgical churches, it's probably helpful to know that your pastor is answering to someone, that he's being held accountable. I feel like that's probably helpful as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, even in our church, we don't call him bishop, but we have the state overseer, and it's cool to know that your pastor has somebody who's also caring for him.
You don't call him bishop?
I do, actually.
I was about to say, I call him bishop.
Ironically, our state overseer happens to be I wonder, do we have state overseers who aren't bishops? Do you have to be a bishop to be a state overseer in our denomination?
I think maybe. I was thinking it might just be a coincidence, but it probably is. You do have to be a bishop to be the state overseer.
Well, if you're from the Church of God of Prophecy and you're listening to this, please email us at thewholechurch@gmail.com and let us know.
If you know more than us and you answer us before I text our friend Chris to ask, go ahead.
Yeah.
So finally, we asked our guests how they could best relate to bishops of other traditions, and here are those clips.
So could you respect the authority of a bishop from another church denomination? And would you expect other denominations to respect the authority of your bishop?
Yeah, I would hope so. Again, you're going to hear me repeat myself. I think, again, we'd have to understand where we're coming from and what that means within their tradition. If they wanted me to come in and teach, or I think our bishop would be welcome to come and teach a class on Martin Luther in another church. But if he was called to just ordain a particular person within the other person's tradition, they're like, no, our bishop's got that. We're going to do it. That's not something you do. You're not going to tell us how to discipline our own churches if we feel like they're doing something wrong. But if they can come in and lead worship and perhaps preside over Holy Communion, those kinds of things can be shared.
Awesome. Great. Okay, so can you respect, or could you respect bishops from other organizations as religious leaders? And do you expect people from other denominations to respect your bishop?
I would say that it would be as somebody who's dedicated their life to Christ in the church is worthy of respect. I mean, we should be respectful of everyone. I mean, it doesn't matter, if you're an ordained person or not. We should be treating each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. I have closer ties with bishops of say like the Catholic tradition or the High Church Protestant tradition, just because of who I've worked with. But I have gotten the blessing, not the blessing to serve or do something liturgically, but I've gotten the spiritual blessing from bishops and lay people and bishops and overseers from other traditions. Asked them to pray for me, and I respect their capacity to do such things. I would definitely say that they have every authority, every right to oversee their churches as they see fit. I'm not as immediately affected by that, but I would say that one should be respectful. One should recognize the sacrifice. As a clergyman myself, I recognize the sacrifice that comes in service to the church, and I'm just responsible of like a third of a parish because there's 3 of us.
Yeah.
My bishop is responsible for 60, 70 parishes, and an overseer for a state and a large denomination will might likely have the same number of parishes that they're responsible for, and fielding responsibilities and dealing with little fires and big fires that come about in the church. And so in that way, the challenge is we don't necessarily. I don't have any. They don't have any direct authority over me and my own action. But I would expect that they would have the same level of respect for me. Turn to me for whatever expertise I have. If they, wanted to know a little bit about patristic theology or spirituality, or practical theology, which is what my PhD is in. I mean, I would hope that I could teach them. I mean, I taught when I was in my doctoral program. I taught students from many different traditions. That authority didn't come from being ordained. I wasn't ordained yet. It came from my position as a teaching fellow and an educated person.
Yeah.
But I would hope that, like with the deacon, or I would say that the bishop ought to, or overseer, or whatever a jurisdiction or denomination calls it, should be respected for their role as leader and figurehead, or chief pastor, whatever it is. Of their community, because it's a as Paul said, they've aspired to a great office, and it's I mean, I would never want that thing. I hope I never have to become one, but yeah.
So just as an example, then, if for some reason, and I do not foresee this happening, but if like a Baptist preacher in Charlotte was sick and their bishop or their overseer were to reach out and ask for you to fill in and preach on a Wednesday or something for him, and you happen to be free, would you be willing to respect that, and I don't know, maybe speak to them if you had a word?
If I got the blessing of my bishop to do something like that and it wasn't liturgical, I could do it. I can't serve in any capacity liturgically in another church. But if they invited me to speak and I got the blessing from my bishop to do it, I would do it. If I was speaking as an expert in theology, as an academic, I would still talk to my bishop and say, "Hey, I'm doing this at a this Baptist church. Is that okay with you?" He's really awesome about stuff like that. He's the one who kind of encouraged me to get my doctorate anyway, so he likes that type of thing. But I would not have. I would accept it graciously as an offer from someone else, but the authority to do it would come from my bishop, not from someone else's bishop.
Okay, awesome.
right, good to know. So could you respect the authority of a bishop from another denomination? And
Yes.
would you expect people from other denominations to respect the authority of your bishops?
Yes. So funny enough, in the church universal, I believe that most, if not all, denominations respect the authority and office of all bishops. But I will say that yes, we our denomination and our church recognize anyone else's bishop. However, I got to throw this out there. However, I don't like that the title of bishop is so not respected as it once was, that now I can, kid you not, Joshua, I can go online, spend $500 and I can become a bishop, have my own crest, have my own episcopal title, all that other stuff. Yeah, if I wanted to.
Weird.
Yeah.
I know the church I grew up in, it was a more of a title of honor that some pastors would get if they've been a pastor long enough kind of deal.
Okay.
But I don't think it functioned any different than a pastor in our. But I'm not sure. Maybe we'll find that out when I interview my my pastor.
Okay.
If a bishop from another denomination came to you and asked your church to help one of his churches, they struggling in some way, what would be, I don't know, what would be the line of where you'd be willing to help?
Yeah, we've done that. Before my time, the pastor before me, wonderful man, received help from other groups when he was building this local church, this local building. And then he went and returned that favor and helped them when they were in building projects. And some of our people did as well. So again, but the criteria would be, you have to figure out who this person is, what their doctrine is, what their teaching is, what they believe about Christ, about, his word, all these things we just discussed previously. Once you know that, I have no problem. The label you wear doesn't really matter to me. It just doesn't. I'm going to tell you right now, we are very close in doctrinal belief systems to the Church of God. And I know there are a lot of Church of Gods. We call it the Church of God Cleveland. And then there's the Assembly of God. We're very close in doctrine to them. There are differences, but they're not huge at all.
Yeah.
And so if someone comes to me of that group, I know who they are. I know what their structure is. I know what their statements of belief are. I have no problem having fellowship with those individuals. You understand what I'm saying? Based on that.
All right. So listening to those interviews again, how do you think bishops could play a significant role in helping engender overall church unity?
Right. So no matter the role the bishop plays in your church, except for the home church, where it is exactly the same, the bishop is someone who has respect of the church, even more so than the pastor. And with that respect comes the ability to lead more widely. And people listen to the bishop. When someone has a title like that, they're a lot more likely to listen.
Yeah. And then for churches who it is more as like a state overseer kind of role or a higher level of ordination, I feel like the role of bishop in those churches could more easily be to say, hey, our church here wants to do this mission. I'm going to reach out to other churches for them to see if we can work together. I can see that working out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And also, I imagine if you're, pastor of Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the bishop of the Lutheran churches in the Carolina region calls you and is like, hey, can our churches do this together? Carries a little bit more weight,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's that standard, powerful person. You get the title and everything that comes with it. And even to those who aren't aware, I think most people generally think bishop, high rank, good man.
Sounds cool, if nothing else.
Right. The bishop, I love moving in diagonals. I'll listen to whatever he has to say.
I was just trying to figure out what chess joke I can make.
To it. Bishop to Isa. But what actions do you think we can all take this week to better maintain Christian unity concerning the office of bishop?
I'm going to do much like what I would tell people who care about issues of politics. Don't wait for the big person over all of the church. Don't wait for, voting for the president. Write to your senator. Although in this case, I'll say write to your bishop. Email your bishop. If you're in a church that's structured that way, if you're in a church that, has stayed overseers instead, email him. Let him know what you would like to see, how you would like to see the church achieve unity in your area, and they can help. Yeah. What would you say, TJ?
I think that's right. If there's one thing that I'm fairly certain is true, it's that bishops want to know who they're leading. So reach out. I'm sure they'd be glad to hear from you. Much more so than your senators.
True.
Yeah. So what would be the ramifications if we all did that?
Church politics gets tricky. Every church is different, but overall, I would imagine that most bishops would hear people in their diocese or people in their state, whatever it may be, want to have unity. And if they hear that that's the priority in the heart of the church, they're going to pursue it too. And I think overall, you'll see churches be not only more able, but you'll just see, sometimes you see the guy pulling the strings on the puppet. You'll kind of see these churches structured better to have unity. That's what I think would happen.
Right.
What do you think, TJ?
I think telling your leaders what you want in their organization is the best way to get what you want. So if they know what you want, that's how it's going to happen. They probably don't just know.
So wise.
Yeah.
That's true. I think that, honestly, just to put it out there, I think a lot of bishops and pastors assume that most lay people are more concerned with their own issues and their own, personal stuff, which, hey, maybe you are. But if they know that you're also concerned with overall church unity, it's going to be on their mind.
Right. Yeah. So try it out. See what happens. I'm sure you won't be disappointed. Unless you are listening from Italy and the Pope just so happens to be your local bishop. The Pope might not have enough time to write back to you. But you should try it anyway.
I don't know how that works.
Me neither.
Yeah.
I know he's the Bishop of Rome. So, hey, if you go to church, add the Vatican. Tell him I said what's up.
I don't know, maybe you get a special clearance to write the Pope. He's more likely to listen to you if you live in Rome.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So we would like to move on to our God Moment segment, which if you've listened before, we just like to take a minute to share what all God's been up to with us recently, whether it be a blessing, challenge, moment of worship, curse, whatever. And I always like to make Josh go first because it gives me more time to think.
Yeah, but I want to be slightly quicker than usual. Today is International Women's Day, the day that we're recording this, and I just feel thankful for all the strong, independent women in my life who have been cool examples and just a blessing to me. Yeah.
Nice. Right.
Yeah.
Mine's pretty much the same because it's International Women's Day. I'd like to give a big shout out to She-Hulk.
Oh, for you too?
I love She-Hulk. No.
Solid one.
Yeah. No, I actually,
I would have went with
yeah.
I would have went with Jessica Drew.
Mm-hmm. But I actually went to a Hurricanes game this past Sunday for the second time, and we won this one, which is good. 50-50. I'm not cursed. And we made it there and back safely. So thank God. Because, man, I hate driving on I-85, especially at 2 a.m.
I hate when anyone I know spends the money and time to go see their team in any sporting event and that team doesn't win.
Yeah, it is really unfortunate.
Genuinely upset if you had gone all that way and that happened to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been tough. But if you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend. Reach out to us. Let us know your God moment. Let us know what you think we can do to engender unity with our bishops. And share it with a friend. Share it with an enemy. You can also share it with a cousin. Who knows?
It's allowed.
It's allowed. And it helps us a lot.
Yeah. And if you want to hear more from TJ and I and some other people who are also self-identifying as geeks, head over to systematicgeekology.org. We just talk about geeky stuff that we like and how it relates to, Christian themes. It's a pretty cool time.
All right. And thank you for listening to the Whole Church podcast. Tune back in next week for part 5 of our church offices series, where we will discuss the office of the apostle. Following that will be the office of the elder. And when we complete the series, we'll take 2 weeks off before returning to our normal format. And at the end of season 1, Francis Chand will be joining us.
Yeah. I hope you heard that, Francis.
Right.
Francis, this is how you figured out that you're joining us.
Yeah. Let us know.
You learned just now.
Have your people call our people, which is us. We'll set that up. Yeah. Once again, thank you for listening. Come back next week. Hop on over to Patreon. Give us a couple dollars. Jahir, Josh, summarize this episode in 10 seconds or less. Josh, are you ready?
Thank you all for listening to the Whole Church podcast. Again, please consider sponsoring the show at patreon.com/the Whole Church podcast. And tune back in next week for part 5 of our church office series when we discuss the role of the apostle.